Hi everyone, this is Woody here from Dive Talk. Unfortunately, there's been another CCR fatality. This was at Lake Constance in Germany. Two experienced tech divers. They died after an emergency ascent from 80 meters, which is about 262 feet. Or 8.94 atmospheres. Now, I'm not here to talk about the Lake Constance issue. I don't know all the facts or details, but it did bring up a topic that I feel I do need to discuss. And the reason I'm discussing this and making this video is because I've been getting a lot of messages after this Lake Constance incident to discuss this along with the incident, but I'm not going to discuss the incident. Instead, I thought about it and I'm going to make a video about why deep CCR divers' risk of death increases. And I'm not afraid to say that because you can get criticized out there sometimes, particularly by the industry. Well, they'll say, well, it shouldn't be said it's the risk of death increases, but it does. That's the point. It does. It doesn't mean you can't mitigate it. It doesn't mean you should not take the proper training. And most importantly, practice, which I gotta say, I need to do more of that myself. So what I'm doing is I'm putting together this video guide, and I'm hoping that it will give you a safety-focused video on the realities of deep CCR diving, and then almost like a checklist of things that we should do before the dive, during the dive, after the dive, and things we should be concerned about. Not to replace any formal class that you should take with an instructor. Not to say that these are the only ways, but definitely for people looking to go into deep CCR diving, which is subjective just by saying the word deep, is deeper than 30 meters deep, or deeper than 100 feet deep, deeper than 130 feet. What is deep? That's subjective. For me, if I'm going to be diving deeper than 130 feet in depth, I am definitely doing some additional steps that are designed to help mitigate the risks associated with diving deeper on a closed circuit rebreather. So I'm going to go through this step by step. I'm going to give you some whys behind these things should be considered, and I hope it helps. For those of you that are thinking about progressing with your CCR diving, are already a mixed gas CCR diver, which I'll define in a little while, meaning you use helium in particular to help mitigate these risks of getting bent during the dive, of additional gas density during deep dives. I hope it helps. It could be a video that is watched, frankly, by anybody, just as a reminder. And sometimes I do these videos to remind myself, Woody, you need to practice. You need to practice. Hope you enjoy it. Okay, so here is phase one. Before the dive, planning and preparation is critically important. Doesn't that sound very generalized? But man, it really is. Now, the first part of before the dive with planning and preparation as it relates to deep CCR diving is the gas selection and frankly helium. So I'm going to be very generalized. This is not meant to replace a class that you definitely need to take in this area if you're going to start using mixed gas. But deep diving requires helium to reduce nitrogen narcosis and gas density. If you do not use the right mixture, your risk of being narked, which is impaired judgment, confusion, inability to multitask effectively, no matter if you think you're immune to it or not, it's science, it will impair your ability to do these things. And gas density, meaning you're going to struggle to breathe, and that can lead to CO2 buildup, which can kill you. So the goal of this very initial discussion is, I think you need to understand how to keep your END, your equivalent narcotic depth, at or below a level that you feel you will not be narked at all. For me, that's 30 meters. I do not want my END, my equivalent narcotic depth, to be more than 30 meters. In other words, I don't want to feel like I'm more narked than I would feel like at 30 meters on regular air. That's for me. But you gotta do the proper gas selection, and for deep diving that involves helium. This next section, this next discussion is gas planning and bailout. So, your rebreather, in my opinion, is a luxury. It's a luxury. But if that luxury breaks and fails, your bailout gas is your life support. You must plan for the worst case ascent, not just a routine one. And in the worst case ascent, I guarantee you, you're going to be breathing a lot faster than you would if you're just simply chilling and cruising along on a normal open circuit dive. So what is the goal? You need to carry enough independent gas to reach the surface from your deepest point, including all your decompression stops. Considering that you may be panicked, considering that you may be bailing out because you had a CO2 hit, which for a while is going to make you breathe in and out much faster. And I said I'm not going to talk about this Lake Constance issue where they had to bail out from 80 meters, but that's 8.94 atmospheres. And just to put that in big, broad terms, that means on open circuit, at that particular depth, you're going to be breathing the gas 8.94 times faster than you would at the surface. Now you're coming up, so that consumption rate is going down, but you need to plan for this. You need to know how to plan for this. You can use a gas planner. I have no issue with that, but I suggest you have that checked with your dive team or dive buddy that you're going to dive with, and really make sure that you are carrying enough independent gas. In my opinion, not team planning, but enough gas to get yourself out of that mess. And I would say add another half of that amount of gas. 1.5 divers should be able to get out of the mess that you're in if you have to bail out from the deepest point in your dive. That's my opinion. Now we're still in this section before the dive, the planning and the preparation. And we're talking about closed circuit rebreathers. assembly and maintenance. I think I've seen some studies say is the number one way to prevent an incident by doing your assembly and maintaining your rebreather properly. So improper assembly or neglected gear like old sensors or contaminated scrubber or scrubber that's been already used too much is a leading cause of accidents. That's not Woody's opinion, that's factual. So what is the goal? Use a written step-by-step checklist for every single build and never rush. And this is a big one. And as I'm getting older, I'm almost 62 years old. I am absolutely all about this one. If it feels off, don't dive. Don't do the dive. Like you're struggling to get the positive and negative to hold properly. Your sensors are just acting squirrely. One is off from the other. They're not quite matching. It's not sealing properly when you're putting it together. Don't do the dive. You don't have to do the dive. Now, inside of this assembly and maintenance, and part of a checklist, certainly has to be sensor verification. For those that don't know much about closed circuit rebreathers, we have to monitor the partial pressure of our oxygen. It is probably the item mentioned the most in any closed circuit rebreather course or manual for a closed circuit rebreather. Always know your PO2, the partial pressure of your oxygen. Why? Because if the partial pressure of your oxygen is too low, you could go hypoxic and pass out and die. If the partial pressure of your oxygen is too high, you could have hyperoxic, oxygen poisoning, some people call it, CNS oxygen toxicity. What can happen with that? You can convulse underwater and die. So there are two very important reasons to know your PO2. Hypoxia or hyperoxic. And if it's off, you could be having the wrong decompressions in your dive computer because the sensors are sending the wrong information to your dive computer. All of these can lead to death. So what's the goal? The goal here is that you got to use at least 3 sensors. And what I mean by that is even though rebreathers are, I can't think of any that don't have at least 3 sensors in them, you have to use 3 sensors. That means there may be 3 sensors in it, but all 3 sensors have to be working, and you learn in a course how to prove that they're working. I'm not here to go through a linearity check or teach you how to prove that on the surface and underwater, but you do also need to understand something called voting logic to know how to identify which sensor is failing if they disagree. Never trust a single sensor. Just think about that logic. What if you have one sensor that's a good bit off from the other 2 that agree? Do you rely on the 2 that are close or the one that is a good bit off from those? Maybe it's the one sensor that is a good bit off that in fact is working, and the other 2 are bad. And if you're underwater and you need to get out of this dive because this is a bailout or an ascent, type of a situation. It doesn't mean you always have to bail off the rebreather. I know you could use it as a semi-closed, or you could even stay on the loop. I would suggest you absolutely bail out first. I would suggest that you let the team know you have a problem. I would suggest that you turn off your O2. I would suggest that you get off that loop and be on that open circuit bailout regulator and dill flush that unit to bring in an absolute safe gas. Not to mention, the dill flush is going to be able to tell you mathematically which sensors are accurate. So you got to use at least 3 sensors. Now this is phase 2, which is during the dive. So execution of the dive and monitoring during the dive. This could be controversial. Many times the things I say are, and I don't mind comments that disagree with me because they add education. And frankly, I'm wrong. Absolutely have been wrong many times. So I like the comments because I learned from it as well. This is my way of practicing, by the way. So I'm doing this video, and in a way I'm practicing. And I think with closed circuit rebreather, you need to practice mentally and while you're doing the actual dive. So I'm going to call the danger zone of closed circuit rebreather diving 40 to 80 meters, because a lot of accidents happen in that range. Deep rebreather incidences are disproportionately common in this range. So I think it's the danger zone because you just have way more incidences in this range. And small equipment or gas management issues, they escalate quickly into life-threatening emergencies very fast when you are deep, which we could have a gazillion videos and arguments of what is deep. I talked about it earlier of what is deep for me. So what is the goal? And I'm talking to myself here. The goal is, Woody, you need to maintain extreme focus at these depths. Task loading is a major contributor to accidents. Do not let your attention drift at this depth, Woody. You know what I do? I've talked about this with Gus. Frankly, I do it on every rebreather dive. While doing the dive, I visualize an emergency and I physically touch the items within my gear that I would use to get me out of that emergency. I touch the DSV as if I'm gonna close it. I touch the regulator. Is it still under my neck for me to lift up the loop and put it in my mouth and put the loop back? I make sure I'm monitoring my PO2. I touch the O2 valve to be able to turn it off. I simulate that I'm leaning to do a dill flush, so I'm leaning in a way where the overpressure valve will eliminate the excess gas from my counterlugs. In other words, I'm maintaining extreme focus and I'm mentally practicing. Well, you may hear me mention this one a lot, just like closed circuit rebreathers mention it a lot, just like course materials related to closed circuit rebreathers mention it a lot, just like your closed circuit rebreather instructor is going to mention it a lot. So it must be important, and I'm mentioning it again. Monitor your PO2. I dive a mechanical rebreather. It's not an electronic rebreather where the computer has a set point and is keeping my PO2 at a constant point. I'm a mechanical rebreather with a constant mass flow trickling in a certain amount of oxygen, but I may have to add or I may have to add O2 or add diluent to keep that PO2 at a set point that I plan my dives at. Low oxygen, I already said, can cause a silent blackout with almost no warning. I think this is something Simon Mitchell has talked about before. If you go hypoxic, you could pass out in 2 seconds. What can you do in 1/1000, 2/1000? You better act quickly. I mean, you could look at your computer and go, oh my God, I have a low PO2, bail out. Put that regulator in your mouth. Now start doing all the other things. My opinion. Too much oxygen toxicity, that can cause a seizure or sudden loss of motor skill underwater. So what's the goal? Monitor your PO2 closely. There's going to be a lot of discussion of whether or not you should have a heads-up display, a HUD, where you see your PO2 right here by your, it's connected typically to your loop, or a mask, where you could see it all the time, or are you just monitoring it with your computer that's on your arm that is connected to the scrubber, where it actually is analyzing the exact partial pressure of the gas. And you definitely need a backup computer that is set to a set point that you told yourself that you were going to plan this dive around. So you need to be able to keep your PO2 to that planned set point, because the backup computer typically is not connected to your rebreather. So it's estimating what the partial pressure of your rebreather is, meaning that if your connected computers fail, you're going to need that computer that's been estimating your partial pressure to get you out of the dive, because it's estimating what your decompression obligation is, because you told it you were keeping your PO2 at a certain level. Did you? Well, monitor your PO2 regularly. Now, here is one where you have to bail out of the rebreather. You cannot stay on the rebreather with this issue. Hypercapnia, which is a CO2 buildup inside the rebreather. For whatever reason, your rebreather is no longer eliminating the CO2 that you are breathing into it every time you exhale. That is the silent killer. If you stay on the rebreather and you're breathing in and out CO2, you're gonna die. Probably is enough for me to bail out. What can cause it? A scrubber failure. You could flood the loop. That could cause it, and cause a caustic cocktail, which would basically burn your mouth or throat or lungs. Overexertion, if you're working really hard against a current and you're over-breathing the rebreather, moving the gas so quickly through the rebreather that it doesn't have time to dwell in the scrubber and remove the CO2. That can cause CO2 to spike. And that can lead to panic, air hunger, or instant blackout. So what's the goal? If you feel any air hunger, a headache, confusion, bail out immediately. Do not try to fix the unit underwater. Bail off the rebreather. The dive is over. Thumb the dive. Flash your buddies. The dive is over. Don't even bother doing a dill flush, because the dive is over. Cut off your O2. We can't have those counterlungs continuing to expand, because you want a slow, steady ascent while you're on your O2 open circuit regulator. Get that counterlung volume venting As you're going up, that air is going to expand in the counter lungs. So you want it to come out those overpressure valves. Squeeze them, lean whichever way your overpressure valve is, get that air out, and come up on a normal ascent on open circuit. You would have changed your computers to know that now I'm on open circuit because you pre-programmed your computers to know what the open circuit gas is that you're carrying if you were to bail out. So if you have a CO2 problem, bail out. Thumb the dive. Diving on a closed circuit rebreather when you immediately are coming from open circuit is going to feel like you are starting over in your diving. And I described to my students when I was teaching over the years on closed circuit rebreather that it's like this U-shaped progression. At the beginning of your class, typically I find it takes 2 or 3 days, you're climbing this hill of your mind saying, why did I do this? Why did I invest all of this money in a closed circuit rebreather? I hate it. To going to the complete other extreme, which is, I don't ever want to dive open circuit again. What a drastic change. And closed circuit rebreather divers love diving on closed circuit rebreathers. But they also absolutely struggled with minimum loop volume and buoyancy. They did. The best of the best struggled with it. I don't care who they are. They struggled with it, but they practiced and they became better and better to the point where it felt almost natural, to where it's second nature to have the correct minimum loop volume and neutral buoyancy on a closed circuit rebreather. It takes practice. And here's some issues that you need to think about when you're going through your class. A small loop volume where you don't have enough gas in the loop makes it physically hard to inhale. And it can get to the point where you've inhaled all of the gas out of the loop, and that may fire an automatic dill valve if you have one on your rebreather. And it's a good idea to have one, because if you're in an emergency, you may wish it was there to give you that little bit of extra air if you sucked through all the gas in the loop. But when you do fire this automatic dill valve, which is bringing in your diluent gas, it's going to lower your PO2, probably. And it's going to increase the counter lung volume, which is going to change your buoyancy. A lot to manage. Takes practice. But having the right minimum loop volume, which means that when you're breathing natural, you have enough air. You don't feel air starved, but you're not firing your automatic dill valve. And then you exhale normally and you inhale normally, and you never feel that starvation of air. And when you do have the wrong minimum loop volume, you're also increasing the work of breathing, which increases your risk of CO2, which I just talked about, which is a silent killer. So we don't want that. And at shallow stops, gas really expands rapidly because you're in those upper atmospheres, Boyle's law. And poor buoyancy can lead to dangerous, uncontrolled ascents. We're in technical diving when we're diving closed circuit rebreathers, meaning we're typically no longer inside of no decompression dives. So going to the surface before you're supposed to can get you bent. It could get you very bent. So what's the goal? I always like to say that to myself, and I'm practicing right now. Maintain enough loop volume for a full deep breath. Practice precise buoyancy at your final shallow stops to avoid seesawing, moving and bouncing up and down. Practice. Minimum loop volume, neutral buoyancy. Takes practice on a rebreather. We all went through it. Even the best of the best, whoever you may think that is. Now, I already discussed that if you're having some kind of a closed circuit rebreather issue, I believe that bailing out and doing a proper dill flush and alerting your team and closing your oxygen is wise to do pretty much for every single issue that you have to deal with on a rebreather. And frankly, I learned that from Patrick Widman, who I respect. I really do respect greatly. Not everybody agrees with this. You do not have to give me 1,000 comments on whether or not you agree. But what I do know about that, and Patrick really nailed that for me, is nothing bad is going to happen by bailing out to a diluent gas, because you have to plan that your diluent gas is safe at any depth. The proper diluent gas that you're set to bail out to at that particular depth is safe at any depth. Because sometimes when you're very, very deep, you're going to carry different types of bailout gases. Some of the gas will have a very low oxygen content, meaning they're safe to dive at a very deep depth, so you don't have oxygen toxicity. But other gases have a higher oxygen content, because if you use that deep gas at a shallow depth, frankly, that could cause you to go hypoxic, because now that gas was meant for the deep part of your dive. So you need to be on the gas that was set up for the shallower part of your dive. Typically, that's a change that occurs for a normoxic dive, a dive that was planned for about 200 feet. There's a gas change typically that's going to happen at about 70 feet. You're typically going to switch to a 50% oxygen-based gas, because that's going to give you around a 1.4 PO2, and then use that gas all the way up to 20 feet or above. And at that point, you're probably going to switch to a 100% oxygen gas to help you get out of the dive. Reduces the time that you have to be on your deco. Now, it takes practice, because switching to an open circuit bailout during a high stress CO2 event, that's a critical moment right there. You don't have a lot of time, and you really don't have time to screw it up. Because if you do, you can die. If you're already struggling with CO2, this transition can be the exact moment where you lose consciousness. Coming off of that closed circuit rebreather and going to the open circuit gas during a CO2 incident could make you pass out just as you were about to be safe and go on that closed circuit gas. So what's the goal? Practice your bailout drills until they are muscle memory, so you can perform them calmly under stress. Woody, practice your bailout drills, Woody. Phase 3, because they kind of overlap, is emergency procedures. When things go wrong, especially if you're deep, man, they go wrong fast. And things are multiplied in terms of how much worse they can be than they are if you're not deep. The immediate bailout rule, Woody's rule, most people's rule. I can't think of any time that you wouldn't bail out in this situation is if you suspect flooding of your rebreather, a CO2 breakthrough, oxygen control failure, electronics failure, stop trusting the rebreather. Switch to your independent open circuit regulator immediately. Close the mouthpiece, get on the regulator, cut off your O2, warn the team, switch the computers, make sure you're venting gas out of the loop, and breathe that open circuit gas, because the goal is to get out of the water at this point, not to troubleshoot. Abort the dive and follow your planned decompression schedule. You got to bail out. It's okay. It's always okay to bail out. Now, what about in this phase 3, these emergency procedures, if you have, during the dive, an unresponsive diver? If this doesn't take practice, then nothing does. If a team member loses consciousness at depth, I think everybody watching this video would agree that time is of the essence. I don't think anybody's going to argue that one. Time is of the essence, but rushing and panicking doesn't help. You don't save that much time if you think you're rushing. So time is of the essence, but taking your time to help this victim could save their life. And not taking your time and rushing could actually kill them if they aren't already dead. The team must be prepared to rescue the diver all the way to the surface and then provide oxygen and initiate emergency medical support as planned. There has been, during rescue classes, an enormous amount of discussion that once you get this unconscious diver to the surface, do you then begin taking off their gear if you have to transport them a long way on the surface to get them either to land or to a boat? Do you take off their gear on the way and try to give them rescue breaths along the way? Do you do that? I've heard many different opinions. I would recommend you practice it, but I don't know. I'm not afraid to say, I don't know. Am I better off just bolting as fast as I can to get that person to the boat or to land and forget about trying to take off their gear and give them rescue breaths? It's a good discussion. I've talked about it a lot with Doug Ebersol. He's on the board of Divers Alert Network. And when somebody like Doug or those kind of really top medical professionals also say they don't know, I think it's okay for me to say I don't know. I am of the nature, though, where I would want to try to save their lives. I think I would want to try to give them those rescue breaths. Would they be effective? Could I give effective rescue breaths? Open their airway, block their nose and give an effective rescue breath while I'm transporting them with water splashing around in a real emergency? I definitely can't do it without being in practice. I don't know. An unresponsive diver is a very difficult situation, and I hope you never encounter it. Phase 4, after the dive, debrief and care. Now, I know that your instructor after the dive did a debrief. because they were required to do that as the instructor. But it doesn't say only do a debrief if you're in a class. It says you should always debrief the dive. Now, I was just at the Dive Talk meetup in Belize, and I'm going to now be extremely honest about myself. I'm not going to talk about anybody else at the meetup. I'm only here to practice for Woody. I'm doing this video as practice for Woody. Maybe some others will get some tips out of it, but I'm practicing right now. How many of those dives, and I did both closed circuit rebreather dives and open circuit dives, did I sit down with the dive buddies I had or people on the boat and do a real debriefing? None. We did some, wow, that was awesome. Did you see that eel eat the lionfish? But we didn't really do a debriefing. Like, did we execute the dive properly? What worked? Did anything not work? Why not? There was some discussion when people had some issues on their rebreather that were, I would consider, debriefings that I heard taking place. But Woody, you need to debrief. And this one I did do. You need to inspect the unit carefully, closed circuit rebreather carefully after every dive. Residual moisture in that scrubber, that can cause a caustic cocktail. It can make it ineffective for the next dive. If you are going to use it again because you didn't use its full useful life. For example, if you have 5 hours worth of scrubber and you only did 2 hours of diving, would you keep it for the next day? Keep the unit sealed where you would use that scrubber again the next day? Or open the unit somewhat to allow air to flow through it. But you do definitely need to make sure that when you are breaking down that unit, you are making sure it is completely dry, and you need to strip the unit, inspect the absorbent material, or just dump it, frankly, because we don't use it past its useful life, and dry the loop thoroughly after every single dive. And this can lead to a discussion that Henry recently talked about called ghost millivolts, where you're getting artificial millivolt readings or bad millivolt readings, frankly, because the wiring is corroding from moisture, from salt. You didn't detox it correctly. It hasn't been dried regularly. So breakdown and inspection, do it after every dive. And debrief. Woody. Data review after the dive. You have incredible data at your dive computer. So subtle issues like a sensor that was sluggish or inconsistent, it might not be as obvious during the dive, but it's going to show up in your logs. Or review that dive profile to ensure that your PO2 stayed within your limits and your decompression was followed exactly as planned. And I would even go back and compare that to your dive plan, your dive planner that you use, because a lot of people are using various online tools. Was it accurate? Was the dive planner pretty accurate? Data review, it's a good one. I need to do that. You better do that, Woody. So here's a summary of key risks in deep closed circuit rebreather diving. I called the danger zone between 40 meters and 80 meters because we have a lot of incidences that have happened in that range. So I'm going to call that deep diving for you, Woody. Summary of the key risks. Here they are. Hypoxia, low oxygen. Rapid loss of consciousness with little to no warning. Hyperoxia, oxygen toxicity, seizures or sudden loss of motor control at depth due to high PO2. Not good. These are the 3 H's. The third H is hypercapnia, which is CO2 buildup, caused by scrubber failure, heavy exertion, or loop flooding. It can lead to panic, air hunger, and unconsciousness. Those 3 H's are not good. Caustic, a boom. 3 H's and then we go 3 H's and they boom. Something, boom, popped on your rebreather. You have bubbles flying all over the place. That's a problem. Is your open circuit regulators blown up where you're not going to have any bailout gas? Is your oxygen tank just popped so you have no more oxygen? Is your counterlog pulled off the rebreather and it's just bubbling all over the place? We got to know how to deal with booms. Internal booms within the rebreather, external booms outside of the rebreather. We got to know how to deal with them all. Caustic cocktail, inhalation of a toxic chemical caused by water ingress into the scrubber. It's like battery acid going into your mouth and throat. Not good. Gas density narcosis, impaired judgment, and increased work of breathing due to improper gas selection, lack of helium in this case. Equipment, mechanical failure, catastrophic failure of hoses, electronics, sensors or valves. Human factors. There's courses on this. Just human factors. Errors in your setup, poor monitoring, task overloading during high stress situations. Decompression sickness, DCS, risk of improper ascent or failure of decompression planning. So you're going to learn a lot about gradient factors. Which gradient factor do you use and why? Excuse me, and why? Woody, are you using the gradient factor that you're comfortable with now at age 62? Do you know what it means? Do you know how it's going to affect your surface gradient factor, Woody? Are you using your computer, your Shearwater computer, to use other advanced tools that are within it that can help you understand your surface gradient factor, or other various advanced tools? And I've talked about that in my advanced computer use video that you can find on this channel. So check it out. Bailout failure, inadequate planning or inability to switch to open circuit gas during an emergency. That's going to kill you, man. Uncontrolled ascents, buoyancy issues at shallow stops leading to rapid, dangerous ascent profiles. It's really crazy too, because a lot of people think, oh, after I've completed that final stop at 20 feet, or maybe it's even at 10 feet, depending on where you set that for, that final ascent from those shallow depths is the biggest pressure change of all of the pressure changes you've had during the entire dive. That's the most opportunity for gas to expand rapidly out of solution and into bubbles that can cause you to be severely bent or cause an embolism, is the shallow portion of your ascent. I hope this helped as a additional guide where we're not afraid to say that deep CCR divers have an increased risk of death. Practice is essential. These are things we ought to be practicing and thinking about. So start doing more of it, Woody. Bye, everybody.